Hey, I'm Rob from Producer Tech, and welcome to the Maschine MKII guide. The aim of this course is to take you from the very beginning right through to advanced operation, covering each aspect of the software and hardware and showing numerous examples of how different styles of music can be made. This module is just going to provide an overview and teach you about the basic architecture, so you can start to get an idea for how it works, before going through everything in much greater detail on the remainder of the course. So let's get started. Maschine is essentially a software program, so can be opened on your computer in standalone mode or as a plugin within your music software, after which it can be used to create beats, instrumental or other parts, or even entire tracks. The hardware is simply a dedicated control surface for the software, so it doesn't need to be connected to use the program. But it makes the whole process quicker and simpler at times, as well as much more fun, of course. I'll open the software in standalone mode first, so by opening up the Maschine application on my computer, after which the last project I was working on will load. And I can open up a different project if I want to by choosing one from the File menu. At this point, as we're using Maschine in standalone mode, we might need to make sure the audio output is set correctly. So I can do this by going to the software's File menu again and choosing Audio and MIDI settings. Then under the Audio tab, I make sure the device I want audio to come out of is selected here. This can be your computer's built-in sound, or an audio interface if you have one installed and connected. Now, if I play the project by pressing play at the top here, or using the button in the transport section of the hardware, you can see the song starts to play. The top half is much like the arrangement section of a sequencer, with the song going from left to right, as you can see by the scrolling position marker on the grey bar. This shows us how far through the current scene we are. A scene is a vertical column with a particular combination of patterns for each of the parts in the song. Instead of playing, or rather looping, all of the scenes in the arrangement, I can also double-click on the bar ruler to loop the selected scene on its own instead, as well as loop smaller parts of the arrangement by adjusting the loop bracket too. The different parts making up the arrangement are shown on the left-hand side, and these are the drums, bass, and other instruments being used in the project. These are called groups, and there are an infinite number of these available, in banks of 8, labelled A to H. I can turn these on and off by clicking on the letters at the end here. Or even faster, by holding down the mute switch on the hardware, and then pressing the group switches. And I can also solo any groups using the solo button in the same way, to check out a group on its own. On the Micro, which has no dedicated group switches, this is done by holding down or pinning the group button, and then using the upper two rows of pads, labelled A to H. So each of the groups can be a number of different things, from a factory drum kit containing different drum samples, loaded onto each of the pads, to a collection of FX or other samples you load onto the pads yourself.
Alright.
To one or more instruments, which can be played with all of the pads, as you can see. I find this to be a really nice way of making bass lines and melodies, as you can easily learn the different pads that make scales or chords, and then just transpose the pads up and down to change the key you're playing in. In the lower half of the software window is the pattern section, which is where you view, edit, and create patterns for groups. Every group can have as many patterns as you like, this time in banks of 16, relating to the 16 pads on the hardware. For example, with my main drums group here, you can see throughout the arrangement that the pattern numbers, which are shown in the orange blocks, are changing constantly. If I play the song again, with the drums soloed, and then click on some different scenes, you can see the pattern changing below, where certain drums are dropping in or out, and the pattern is changing in some way. And you'll notice the pattern section looks a lot like a regular MIDI editor in a DAW, with a bar ruler at the top and a grid below containing MIDI notes, or events as Maschine refers to them. These events can be displayed in pad mode, where there's a row for each pad in the group, or in keyboard mode, when the events are playing melodies or chords. Then in between the pattern and scene sections is the plugins and channel settings section. With the plugins button active, you can add and edit instruments and effects, either from Maschina's factory library or your external plugin collection. The switches at the end set whether you apply plugins to a sound within a group, the whole group, or the master channel, so all groups together. And Maschina's library alone provides a wide variety of high-quality effects, including dynamics processors, equalization, modulation effects, reverbs, delays, and distortion. We'll be going through all of these effects on the course in the 2 dedicated effects lessons, where we'll look at how to apply them as inserts to sounds, as well as send effects, as Maschina has internal routing that allows you to use sounds within a group as auxiliary channels for applying more advanced effects processing. Additionally, if I open up the browser using the switch here, and then click on the FX switch at the top, you can see there's a whole host of effects from other NI instruments that can also be added to parts. The browser is where you find all of the saved presets for Maschina, whether they're projects, so complete arrangements, groups, so a collection of different sounds mapped onto all of the pads in a group, which is mostly different drum kits, instruments, which are sampled sounds that you can load onto a pad in a group, any other synthesized or sampled presets from the NI collection that you can load onto a pad, or samples, which are drums, loops, or one-shots, again for loading onto pads in a group. Also, as with the other NI instruments, you have attributes or types here that can be selected to help you narrow down your search. Maschina also has an extensive sampling facility, with a comprehensive set of editing features for slicing, truncating, time stretching, and so on. And you can also record your own samples too, for adding your own individual hits, loops, or longer vocal or instrumental phrases. All of this is covered in the sampling lesson later on. So far then, I've mostly showed you the software, but the real beauty of Maschina is just how much can be done from the hardware, where browsing and even editing can be done incredibly quickly and easily. Until now, I've very much been a mouse user, but Maschina has definitely made music making much more hands-on for me. And I found that by using a combination of the mouse and the hardware, I can achieve a really fast and efficient workflow. Just to give you a quick example then, I've got a new project here with a kit loaded into Group A, so with a load of different drum samples on the pads. I'm using the Mark II Maschina hardware for this, but in all of the remaining lessons, I'll be using whatever hardware the course is teaching, so Mark II, Micro, or Studio, depending on the course. Now I'll set the tempo to 170 BPM, then turn on the metronome, hit record, and then shift record to give myself a count in, after which I can record in a 1-bar loop. Then I can add parts one by one as I like, coming in and out of record. And now using the note repeat feature. Then I can do things like double the length of the pattern, so it's 2 bars long, and then add something to the end of the second bar, to give it a bit more variety. Now I can add some melodic parts, which I've got in groups B, C, and D, all of which are in keyboard mode, meaning I can play those sounds using all of the pads. And now for some bass. And I can even add and tweak effects from the hardware too. That was done in 5 minutes without touching the computer, and made a nice groove that can be used as the basis for a track. so you probably noticed from that quick demo there that you have all sorts of useful controls on the hardware for changing modes and editing parts. We've seen the solo and mute buttons a fair bit already, but there's also a select button, which allows you to select sounds or events on a pad. And a pattern button for allowing you to select patterns with the pads, and a scene button for selecting scenes. And each time you can see on the display what scene or pattern the pad relates to. All of these modes can also be latched or pinned. This is done using the top left button above the screens in each mode, or using the pin button on micro. After which the mode can be turned on and off with consecutive presses, instead of having to hold the mode button down. Then you have the shift button, which changes the function of many of the controls on the hardware. For example, on Mark II and Micro, all of the pads have shift commands, with the most common ones being undo and redo, which you can carry out by pressing Shift and Pad 1 and Shift and Pad 2, respectively. Studio has dedicated buttons for these commands above the jog wheel. And the Shift button also provides a shortcut to some of the mode buttons, where Shift and Select allows you to immediately select events on a pad, without having to go into select mode and change the status of the select button, which normally selects sounds in a group. Again, on the Studio, there's a separate Events button, purely for selecting events. Then you have Copy and Paste, which are shift commands on pads 11 and 12, which are also very handy. And then Nudging and Transposing. And also Clearing, which is another common one. So editing is often just as fast, if not faster, with the hardware than with the software. Finally, the software window is totally customizable, as you can change the overall size with the View menu, as well as change the sections that are shown using the switches in the corners, to remove certain areas when you're not using them. And this can all be done from the hardware once again, of course, using the buttons in Navigate mode. So that's given you an introduction, but don't worry if you got lost in one or two places, because like I said at the start, we'll be going through everything in much greater detail on the rest of the course. And remember, I'm on hand to answer questions over email or on our forum if you get stuck at any point. Before continuing, make sure you download the course pack, which contains all of the Maschine presets and additional course materials. Next time, we'll be diving in and looking at pattern creation, so you can learn all about how to construct a beat. See you then.